everyone today to our CCSE Talks event on menstruation in sport, unpacking menstrual knowledges and stigma. So we're really delighted to have with us today Dr Petra Kolić from Manchester Metropolitan University and also Agatha Gibbons, a PhD student at Waikato University in New Zealand. So before we start today, we just want to give you a little introduction to the CCSE. So we are the Centre for Sport Events and Culture at the University of the West of Scotland. We run our CCSE Talk events throughout the academic term, doing events talking around issues to do with tourism, events and also sport. And so today this event is focusing on menstruation and sport. So what we'll do is we'll have a presentation from Petra, then a presentation from Agatha before opening up to 15 or 20 minutes or so of questions at the end. So please do, as you're listening to the conversations, please do feel free to pop questions in the chat and we can collect them and pose them to Petra and Agatha at the end. But also if you prefer to ask your question, then at the end you can raise your hand and we'll bring you in that Q&A session. Without further ado, Petra, I'll hand over to you if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me along this afternoon, Chloe. Just bear with me whilst I share my screen, okay? I should be really good at this, but you'll be surprised at how clunky I can be with this sometimes. Let me just mute these notifications because the notifications from the chat are coming through. I think I might just mute the chat for a minute. I was just pinging at me. Okay, I'll just be uploading my slides and then I should be good to go.
That's perfect. We can see them there, Petra.
Fantastic. I'll just go into presenter mode. There we go. Okay, so thank you so much for coming today. I can see there's lots of people in the call. Now I've got my presentation full screen now, so I can't currently see the chat, but as Chloe said, any questions we can talk about later, or you can just pop them in the chat and I can address them later on. As Chloe said, my name is Petra Kolić. I am a senior lecturer and a social scientist at Manchester Metropolitan University. Today I'll be talking about my research into menstrual stigma and its impact on activities of daily life. So I'll give a little bit of quite a broad overview today that may spark further conversations, which I'm happy to go into in questions or obviously continue the conversation on another day. Before we look at the research specifically that we as a group of colleagues here at Manchester Metropolitan University and also actually at University of West Scotland have been doing, I'd like to just set the scene, okay? So I suppose the research that I do and many other researchers do in and around menstrual health is very much linked to menstruation, the menstrual cycle, okay? So when we think about menstruation, when we think about the menstrual cycle, it may be that the first thing that comes to mind are things, questions around reproduction, a period which I will use interchangeably with the word menstruation, can be quite an important factor at certain points in life, whether people want to get pregnant or they don't want to get pregnant. Or if there are any symptoms that arise that may be out of the norm. And it's a very good question, what is normal and isn't normal within the context of menstrual cycle symptoms. But then also menstruation and menstrual symptoms are something that we think about. But I suppose it's important to remember that we're talking about a biological process here, whereby during a period, what happens is that the uterine lining sheds. So the uterine lining accumulates over the course of the menstrual cycle with various hormonal fluctuations. I'm not a physiologist. A physiologist will explain this a lot better to you. But I suppose what I'd like us all to remember is that there's something physical happening with the body. Now, attached to menstruation are lots of different symptoms, okay? And this is by no means an exclusive list, but we can begin thinking about menstruation in terms of its physical manifestations. We often talk about menstrual bleeding. It's technically not blood, it's menstrual fluid, which is a mixture of blood and mucus, but it looks like blood. when it leaves the body. Other symptoms that are physical in nature could include fatigue, pain, cramps. Now, some people who have periods, and I will use the terms girls and women today, but of course, when I talk about girls and women, it's individuals who have a menstrual cycle, okay? So any gender identity will be included, but for ease, I'll use girls and women interchangeably. Again, a very interesting discussion point that we can delve into later on. So when menstruating people, girls and women, have periods, some might experience all of these symptoms, physical ones, some might experience only, for example, the bleeding element. There are also some psychological symptoms that have been reported in the literature, such as changes to mood, a dip in self-efficacy when there's an accumulation of menstrual cycle symptoms, motivation, and body image. And what is particularly interesting to me as a social scientist are all the social implications, things like avoiding of behaviors, the shame attached to having a period, silencing how one feels during a period, or masking how one feels, or masking when we go to the toilet and carry a menstrual product to the toilet. Now, whilst there has been an increasing amount of initiatives and campaigns in sport, there's been changes to what female athletes wear as part of their competition kit. There's been lots of interesting and quite informative public campaigns via media outlets, including social media. And that is all helpful. I think you'll find when you're in a room full of people and you start talking about periods in quite a lot of detail, quite matter of fact, people tend to feel a little bit awkward. Now, us here today, we might think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm quite happy to talk about periods, menstrual health, gynecological health, reproductive health, sexual health. And that's because we're interested in this particular topic. So what I personally tend to find, if you have time and you find yourself in a conversation where periods are something to do in the broader sense with sexual reproductive health comes up, pay attention to how people react. Some people laugh, giggle, feel a little bit awkward. And this is what I find really interesting, how we have this bodily experience that has quite a few social meanings, and this interplay of that bodily experience and the social meanings have implications for people's behaviors. So the behaviors of those people who have periods, but also the people surrounding them, coaches, instructors, teachers, and so on, parents, siblings, etc., partners. The research that we've been conducting has been focusing on exercise and education more broadly. I'll talk about both today because our research in exercise has led us to actually look at what is happening in our teenage age group, specifically in an education context. Now, theoretically, and I haven't really spent a lot of time putting detail into the theory side of the research, purely for time reasons, but very happy to elaborate on that later on. But theoretically, in the broader sense, I would call myself an interpretivist researcher. So when I explore things like stigma, I like to align myself with theoretical concepts that align with symbolic interactionist theorizing, dramaturgical theorizing. Here we can begin to think about stigma as an attribute that is deeply discrediting, that is Goffman's definition of it, also a blemish of the character or body. I also like to play with the notion of menstrual etiquette, so borrowing from Sophie Law's work here, who described menstrual etiquette as the norms, expectations, and behaviors associated with menstruation. Now, this is menstruation specifically in public, okay? So when we are surrounded by other people, how do we act, feel, and think when we have a period in a public context? So, as I said, I'm a qualitative researcher, social scientist. I don't really do numbers, but when we started this body of work a couple of years ago, I was just at the end of my PhD. My PhD was a symbolic interactionist investigation on elite coach education, so really nothing to do with periods. But as it sometimes happens, it was a bit of a dead end, and I had a conversation with a colleague, and I started to realize that actually, whilst we have a body of literature in sort of the physiological domain in and around menstrual health, reproductive health more broadly, and the more applied insights weren't there at the time. There's lots more research out there now. So we started actually with some mixed method work. Now I've got brilliant colleagues here at the university who've pulled together some validated survey material, and so this is published work, so you can read up on that, but it's quite useful for me today to kind of contextualize how we've kind of built this body of work. So when we started initially with our online surveys, you can see the first one only had 128 participants, was fairly small, second one slightly bigger. We asked about things like menstrual characteristics, pain, flow, self-reported exercise engagement. And then in the second survey, we asked about self-efficacy and coping with stressful situations. The reason for that was that we had to actually figure out, is this worth studying? Is there any point in us going out there and me going to interview people about their experiences? Is actually menstrual health something that we want to understand more? Is there a need to understand it more within the context of sport, exercise, and physical activity in the broadest sense? And the short answer is yes. Maybe unsurprisingly. So what we were able to do with some of the survey work, which was quite helpful to frame a narrative for the qualitative work and provide a bit of context, was actually we were able to categorize people into a group of avoiders. So over a third of our participants that took part in our surveys were classified as avoiders of physical activity. So those are people who just don't go to the gym, don't go to their training session, don't go for their run when they have menstrual symptoms, okay? Then in the middle, we've got the adapters. So the adapters are quite interesting because those are people who change something, but don't do it quite the way that they would normally do when they don't have a period. And then we have a non-avoiders who have effective coping strategies in place in order to continue exercise. Now, we went into this at first, and there's lots of debate in the field of menstrual health and menstrual cycle research. What do we focus on? Do we focus just on a period? Do we focus on a specific phase? Now, the approach that we took was we asked about what is the most impactful kind of phase of the menstrual cycle on your physical activity engagement. And it tends to be menstruation period. Now, there's obviously variability. People who struggle with PMS symptoms, ovulation symptoms may have a different answer. But on the whole, that's what kind of led us to focus specifically on periods. Interestingly, when we think about our avoiders of physical activity, non-avoiders, those who avoid physical activity have more severe menstrual pain. 2/3 of avoiders, compared to only 1/4 of non-avoiders of physical activity, have heavy menstrual flow. So there's a classification tool for that. And maybe unsurprisingly, avoiders have lower self-efficacy for exercise. Okay. Also, avoiders have higher self-care needs and engage in more withdrawal coping strategies. So those were really useful insights because actually, when I did those first interviews, as you can see here, the first study was a mixed method study where we followed up with interviews after an online survey. I wasn't quite sure what I should be asking participants about. So having the insights from the survey was quite useful, actually. So I could kind of steer my conversation with participants into a certain direction. Interestingly, where the social perceptions and meanings came into play, where that actually what other people think and the social environments within which we engage in physical activity inform what we do in those exercise contexts. Okay, so for example, one of the things we explored was that actually those who adapt are 34% of adapters. Some of them adapt because they feel pressure to attend. Things like worry over not showing up for training and then not being played at the weekend were conversations that we had, or not wanting to let somebody down that they had agreed with to engage in exercise. So there is sort of a social meaning to periods beyond the physical domain, which for me as a social scientist was really exciting because that gave me lots to think about. So obviously, when we think about menstruation as a social issue, this isn't an official term. I just used it to kind of contextualize menstruation beyond the physical experience, okay? And so we've identified that actually, okay, yes, after those first two studies, a mixed method one and the online survey, we were able to think, okay, experiences and perceptions of menstruation can impact activities of daily life. So then we went to explore, okay, what are the norms and expectations and perspectives that shape exercise? But also, quite interestingly, without me asking participants about it specifically, what kept coming up is that actually those early years of having a period are quite crucial in shaping the way that we approach things like coping strategies, how we think about periods and how we navigate that. And then actually the adult participants that I spoke to, people in the 20s, 30s and 40s, said things like, I needed to become an adult, a grown up. I needed to have a few years of period, live as an adult to then almost reframe how I think about my own period, realize that it isn't anything shameful or anything to be embarrassed about. It's part of who I am, which has then led us to focus on sort of education context, which I'll speak about a little bit today as well. So let's look at first at that work that we've done in and around norms and expectations. So When we think about kind of in the broader sense, social considerations and exercise, our questions here change. So what we're trying to find out has been more towards what are the meanings, the norms and expectations attached to exercise and menstruation? And how do those and why in certain ways do they shape thoughts, feelings and behaviors? Okay. So we've done some work here, some focus group work, some semi-structured interview work. Again, this work is published. We've worked with, so I interviewed adult women, physically active at any level who have a menstrual cycle. So it was quite broad. A fairly large group of people could take part. So this is where we then used symbolic interactionist and dramaturgical theory to actually make sense of our participants' perceptions and enactment of various behaviors and strategies within the social exercise space. Now, what we found is that there appears to be a desire to present a normal and well-functioning self during the period. It's almost like that upholding of a front in a social exercise environment is quite important. And only a very small number of people are allowed onto the backstage where we disclose, oh, I'm feeling really unwell today. I'm bleeding quite heavily, or my back's really hurting. I'm just not feeling myself. In order to be able to uphold that well-functioning self, our participants would implement impression management strategies to hide menstrual pain, to hide the discomfort and the fatigue. So that was important so that others don't find out that one is menstruating. Now, why is that important? Interestingly, there was this fear of judgment. It isn't so much that the participants who took part in these studies had so many negative experience of leaking in public. It was more a case of a built-up worry within themselves, a worry over the visibility of menstruation. What would other people think if they saw me carrying a tampon to the toilet? What would somebody else in the changing room think if I put a pad in the bin? Okay, so those were the thoughts and concerns that shape participants' thoughts and informed them what they did and whether they entered the exercise environment. So this is where menstrual etiquette came into play, the enactment of menstrual etiquette, because menstruation can be shameful and embarrassing and must therefore be kept a secret from others. We must conceal the evidence. Now, as I said, this menstrual etiquette is learned. So this is learned early when we have our first experiences of menstruation through upbringing, education, and other socialization instances. Now, we then focused on education. There's a lot to be said. There's a little bit of research out there, actually, about parents, siblings, kind of what happens within the home environment and learning about things like menstrual health. But we then looked at education specifically, and we looked at what is the menstrual health support, communication, education in secondary schools in Greater Manchester. Now, those of you who may not be very familiar with Greater Manchester's got quite an interesting makeup in that it's a very densely populated area. It's very diverse as well, and it sits quite high on the social deprivation index, unfortunately, so the English social deprivation index. So we've got quite a diverse socio-demographic makeup. And we went into this research thinking, okay, so school settings are we know that schools are really important in shaping narratives around all sorts of different things, including menstruation. And we know from existing work that current education is fairly limited. And if there is education, it's very much focused on the sciencey bits. So I went to various schools in Greater Manchester and surrounding areas. Kind of the places that you can see on this little map are the boroughs of Greater Manchester. I conducted focus groups with female pupils and secondary school staff, teaching and non-teaching, and a male colleague conducted focus groups with male pupils. So the male pupil focus groups are still ongoing. We'd like to conduct 2 more focus groups. The female pupil and staff focus groups are finished. So this is kind of a project that is ongoing. We're just writing up everything that needs to be written up. And what are some of the preliminary insights? There appears to be no place for menstruation in the school environment. Now, there are free period products in English schools. However, schools need to be really careful with where they place those products because of worries over vandalism or experience of vandalism. So teachers would report that initially period products were in the toilets, but then some of the pupils stuck them to the walls, put them down the toilets, and obviously that had really negative consequences because it created a cost for the school to have to fix whatever was damaged or the toilets blocked. But because menstruation tends to be silenced, except some science education in year 8 and or year 10, in secondary schools, this silencing perpetuates the stigma associated with it. It kind of starts the cycle of, oh, this needs to be kept quiet. I can't show anyone. I can't talk about this. There are rules. There's so many rules, and I never thought I would be talking about toilets and toilet rules so much as I did over the course of these focus groups that I've done. And these rules, whilst there may be a need for them, they're currently negatively affecting menstrual hygiene and health, where because toilets are locked at certain times of the day, pupils aren't allowed to go to the toilet during lessons, with exceptions, which again, exceptions are difficult to navigate for teachers. Some pupils can't make it to the toilet during the whole school day because during break time there isn't enough time, and during lesson you're not allowed to go. If you're not a confident person to speak up in lesson and really make your case, you might end up 6 hours or so without being able to change your pad or tamp, which is very problematic. Importantly, though, there is an appetite among pupils, male and female, and staff to know more, learn more, and talk more about menstrual health. It's just about exploring how we can do that best without interfering with kind of any of the core subjects. And I'm also supporting the school in tailoring it to their needs. I suppose what's really important, what I'd like to highlight, is that not everyone needs to talk about the personal experience in and around menstrual health, but we do need to make the experience of menstruation more visible in the school environment so that we can manage our menstrual health. Teenagers can manage the menstrual health better. Female and male teenagers can support their peers, their girlfriends, their siblings, their moms more effectively in managing menstrual health. So just to finish, moving forward, where we're heading, of course, write up some papers. We're going to be doing some policy work as well. This is obviously in Greater Manchester, and some pupil and educator workshops. My vision for this body of work is to develop something like a model for supporting menstrual health in secondary schools that educates, helps with communication, raises awareness of menstrual health, so that we can keep pupils more engaged in school, keep pupils more engaged in physical activity and physical education in their teenage years and beyond, and that we can just help them be able to advocate for themselves, so that should there be issues and symptoms that may not sound normal, that they know how to speak up for themselves, that they can look after and kind of pursue their health with the tools that they have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Petra. It was a really brilliant insight into the research that you've been conducting so far, so thank you very much. Please do, if you do have any questions for Petra, pop them in the chat or write them down and we can ask at the end, and we'll collect the questions together at the end to ask both Petra and Agatha. So Agatha, I'm not sure if you are here and ready as well. So Agatha Gibbons is a PhD student at University of Waikato in New Zealand, and she'll be presenting some of her research on Pacific women's experiences and knowledges of menstruation. So Agatha, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself.
Yeah, I'm just sharing my screen right now.
Perfect, it's just came up. That's fantastic.
Can everyone? Okay, there we go.
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Pacific sportswomen's menstrual health knowledge and experiences. Kia ora, Bulavinaka, and warm Pacific greetings, everyone. My name is Agatha Gibbons. I am from the beautiful islands of Fiji, and I am currently a PhD student at the University of Waikato. Thank you for being here today. I'm excited to share the findings and implications of our research, which is guided by the MASI methodology and explores the intersection of sports science, Pacific knowledge, and women's knowledge. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge my supervisory team. Our team is made up of experts in sports science, law, and sociology. Together, we undertook research aimed at understanding the unique experiences of Pacific sportswomen, with a particular focus on menstruation and its impact on their sporting lives. This work extends beyond academic inquiry. It represents a meaningful step towards recognizing and valuing the rich cultural context that shape the lives and experiences of these athletes. So after many years of silencing and stigma, the topic of menstruation in sports is receiving an increased attention and focus. Athletes are speaking out about their experiences on menstrual health related issues, such as leaking while playing, pain and discomfort. As you can see here on this slide, here are some of the athletes who have spoken out about their menstrual experiences. And some of these articles are from the Olympic Games, which just held last year, where athletes were still experiencing menstrual issues. And here's a few recent articles or research that focused on menstruation in sport. However, there is still a call for more research on the topic of menstruation. So current research on menstruation in sports is predominantly led by white women scholars and centers largely on the experiences of white women. Unfortunately, these findings are often generalized across women in sport, overlooking the diverse and culturally specific experiences of women from other backgrounds. Therefore, so our research seeks to address this gap by highlighting the importance of culturally grounded perspectives and ways of knowing and understanding menstruation experiences among Pacific sportswomen. So the Massey methodology, this research is framed by the Massey methodology. The Massey methodology is designed to help a researcher understand the process of doing research on and with Pacific women and ensure that Pacific women's voices are the main priority and should be respected at all times. The Massey approach framed my entire project, including the survey design and the Talano sessions in Fiji and in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'll just explain more about the Massey. The Massey, which is a cloth that's made up from the bark of a tree, has been around the Pacific for many years, and ancestors have passed down this traditional item from many cultures. Each culture has a traditional way of designing its own Massey, and in the Fijian culture, the women from different villages would have certain traditional patterns and designs to indicate where the Massey originated from. The Massey methodology is not only centered around the voice of Pacific women, but Massey as a metaphor for research reflects many of the Pacific research values, such as respect, relationship, balance, and rights. So as a female Pacific researcher who was brought up in Fiji, my cultural background and experiences of being a Pacific Islander and a Fijian sportswoman was an advantage for this research, especially with the Massey methodology being created by a Fijian scholar. So this right here was my first publication with the British Journal of Sports Medicine. It was titled Moving from Ethnic Exclusions to Cultural Safety: How is Athlete Ethnicity Discussed in Research on Menstrual Health in Sport? This publication presents the finding of a scoping review that critically examines how athlete ethnicity is addressed in existing menstrual health research within the field of sport. So out of 1,089 studies initially identified in the different database search, 55 studies addressed ethnicity. 9 studies met the inclusion criteria were assessed for quality. 22% were rated as good, 44% as fair, and 33% as poor in their treatment of athlete ethnicity. A significant 81% of research articles on menstrual health in sports did not consider athlete ethnicity. When ethnicity was addressed, it rarely adhered to the principles of cultural safety within the research process. The majority of the studies failed to integrate ethnicity into their analysis and lacked cultural consideration in both their research designs and interventions. So menstruation in sports in the Pacific. Menstruation in the Pacific has been a topic of study in the past. However, it is rare to find research conducted by Pacific women themselves, and there's been none focused specifically on Pacific sportswomen. So our research aims to fill this gap by exploring the unique experiences of Pacific sportswomen with menstruation, providing valuable insights from their perspectives. So the first phase, or the first data collection that was involved a survey specifically designed to ensure cultural safety for our Pacific participants. We had an introductory video that was included in the survey, where I thoroughly explained the significance of their contribution to the research and emphasized the importance of addressing the existing gap in the literature. The survey link was distributed to various sporting organizations across the Pacific, and we were able to receive a total of 205 participants. So in our survey on Pacific culture and menstrual health, we found a common theme. Menstruation is often labeled as an illness or sickness across diverse cultures in the region. Each participant describes specific cultural practices related to menstruation in their communities. These practices often include like taboos and stigmas. The women mentioned various cultural customs, such as family feast when entering womanhood, or taboos like restricted interactions with others and limited access to sacred spaces during menstruation. These findings highlight the significant impact of cultural beliefs on menstrual experiences for Pacific sportswomen. Menstruation and sports performance can be influenced by cultural and religious beliefs, and this is particularly true for Pacific sportswomen. Our survey revealed that opinions are split on whether culture and religion impact menstrual health in sports. We also found diverse views on menstrual taboos and stigmas within sports. A significant portion of the sportswomen felt that having a period sometimes reduced their performance. Meanwhile, some were unsure about unsure about how their periods affect their performance, and a small number actually felt it enhanced their performance. So these insights highlight the varied experiences and perceptions of menstruation among Pacific sportswomen. And our survey also identified communication as a major barrier to accessing menstrual health support for Pacific sportswomen. The participants felt most comfortable discussing menstrual-related issues with teammates, and then followed by coaches and managers. However, there was a significant barrier that was noted when communicating with male staff, such as male coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, doctors, and others. The main issues included the gender of the staff, and then the stigmas surrounding the topic and a perceived lack of knowledge by the staff. Additionally, concerns were cultural and religious differences, and the fear that discussing these issues might negatively impact their position in the sport. So therefore, to improve the support, Pacific sportswomen are asking for more open conversations, educational seminars, and better education for coaches and support staff on menstrual health topics. They also highlighted the need for more online resources and educational materials specific to Pacific sportswomen's health. These findings underscore the importance of creating a supportive and informed environment for addressing menstrual health in sports. So this is a slide that shows a word cloud that the participants identified with different words that are used in their cultures to describe menstruation. And the Pacific Islands are made up of 22,000 islands, and we have 1,200 languages. So these were the few words that I could gather from my participants in the survey. So the second part of my data collection, we drew upon two cases. One which was in Fiji. The first case was in Fiji, where we had 21 sportswomen across 7 sports. And then the second one was in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where we had 18 Pacific sportswomen that were involved in 5 different sports. So menstruation can be approached in various ways within Fijian society. However, meaningful discussions require a deeper understanding of the topic. Our research underscores the significant role of family in shaping women's knowledge and experiences of menstruation, revealing diverse approaches to the subject across households. When families create safe spaces and educate both sons and daughters, it can lead to generational shifts in awareness and attitudes. In the context of sports, it is essential that both coaches and athletes receive education on menstruation. Creating forums for open dialogue would enable athletes to share experiences and allow coaches and support staff to better understand and respond to the emotional and physical variations athletes may face. So in my second article, this paper, we drew upon Talana sessions with 21 Fijian sportswomen to reveal their knowledge and experiences of menstruation in sport. Using the Masi methodology and ensuring the voices of these women were always the main priority, we discovered three key themes. Firstly, menstruation in Fijian society is still a taboo subject, particularly if males are present. However, some of the athletes mentioned how their parents were increasingly willing to talk about menstruation, suggesting signs of social change regarding the attitudes towards menstruation. Secondly, the Talanoa sessions with sportswomen showed that they navigate many different challenges while menstruating, particularly discomfort and pain that is not acknowledged by coaches, and also concerns about leaking or displacement of menstrual products, mostly pads, while training or competing. Thirdly, many of the athletes acknowledge the difficulties of navigating cultural stigma and taboo, particularly the unwillingness of coaches to listen to or emphasize with their experiences of menstruation. These athletes called for change from the grassroots level in sports and in the classroom, as important for changing cultural attitudes towards menstruation, which will then lead to more coaches and sporting professionals being willing to talk on the topic of menstruation. And like I've said before, in Fiji, they also said more education is needed on the topic, um, with the Fijian people and sporting and health professionals needing to understand that menstruation is not a sickness, but it's actually part of a woman's bodily function. And and yeah. So this is one of the quotes that I got from one of my participants. She said, "It's such a taboo subject, and everybody's either scared to talk about it or tries to avoid it." Participants also shared how sometimes their experiences with coaches about menstruation felt like more like ignorance, in the sense that coaches would rather avoid any details about the athlete's menstrual cycle. There was never an initiation of the topic. Coaches never asked about how the athletes felt or how their menstrual cycle could affect them. Participants mentioned how support staff like managers and athletic trainers would always remind them to prepare themselves beforehand in case the athlete's menstrual cycle started while traveling. However, that was the only discussion about menstruation. The support staff did not really go into details about what the athlete was experiencing or how they were handling the situation and what could be done to improve the situation. So for my next steps, I just submitted my PhD thesis, and I'm currently working at the University of Waikato as the Pacific Health Science Academy coordinator, and I'm also continuing my research on menstruation and sport in the Pacific, exploring more on how cultural, social, and structural factors influence participation and access for young women, young Pacific women and girls. Oh, sorry, I don't know what just happened there. Oh, there we go. So the key takeaway from my research is the urgent need for sports organizations to recognize and incorporate the cultural needs and knowledge of Pacific sportswomen. This involves moving beyond one-size-fits-all approach to athlete support and instead developing culturally designed social and medical support systems. Such systems should honor and integrate the traditional practices and understandings of health and well-being that are culturally safe for our Pacific cultures. My hope is that our work will inspire a shift in how sports organizations view and support Pacific sportswomen. By valuing and integrating their cultural knowledge, we can create environments where these athletes not only thrive, but feel genuinely respected and understood. This is not just about enhancing performance, it's about fostering inclusivity and respect in sports, ensuring that every athlete has the opportunity to succeed while staying true to their cultural identity. Thank you, and Vinaka. Oh,
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Agatha. That was fantastic. And also a huge congratulations on submitting your PhD thesis. What a great feat. Um, so that's fantastic.
thank you.
No problem. So now we'll open up to questions for Petra and Agatha. I've collected a couple from the chat already, so I might just start with those, and then if anybody would like to continue adding questions to the chat or raise your hand, either option is fine. So firstly, for Petra then, we had a question from Jessica Best who said, so brilliant to see discussion about stigma and etiquette. When you asked participants about their symptoms, did you also record whether participants had had health conditions such as PCOS or endometriosis, as these conditions are so common and can significantly impact menstrual experiences, how we talk about it, and how we think about our own or others?
In short, yes. What we've been trying to do is be quite inclusive in terms of the participants that can take part in the research studies. In that anyone, irrespective of whether they want any hormonal contraceptive, whether they'd experienced anything problematic in the past or currently dealing with things like any heavy menstrual flow or conditions such as PCOS and endometriosis. And it was able to take part. I suppose, as you can imagine, the conversations were slightly different with those participants. But I have found that especially those individuals who may have not necessarily a diagnosed condition, but I would say just more bothersome periods or menstrual cycle symptoms in general that they're experiencing. It almost seemed like it was quite cathartic for them to talk about their experiences. And so there is certainly a need for people to be heard. I guess I was quite careful, of course, when we came to analyze the data, to not exaggerate, and just showcase somebody's experiences where we know they're diagnosed with endometriosis. So obviously just had a bit of an eye on that, but equally highlighting as and when it was relevant that, with more severe menstrual symptoms, such as those that can arise from conditions such as PCOS and endometriosis, these are some of the experiences that people have. But yeah, it certainly does shape people's experiences. And I have had some very interesting yet sad conversations about how long it takes to diagnose anything that isn't the norm.
Yes, what a shame. And I don't know, Agatha, if again either of these conditions came up in your discussions with Pacific women on their menstrual experiences or other sort of menstrual disorders which have a particular impact on women.
So, like, one of the things that I noticed, that, like, due to the lack of knowledge that a lot of the Pacific sportswomen, like, that were part of my survey and also the interview sessions, a lot of them didn't realize that they were actually having like menstrual health issues, like heavy flow, like, or missing periods. Like, they didn't realize that it was something to do with their health. They just thought it was like a normal thing. So until they like had a conversation with the doctors, and then the doctors told them, oh, like, we need to look into that. But a lot of them just went with it and just ignored the symptoms and just kept on showing up to practice and training. It was like someone asked me if I knew if Red S existed in Fiji. And I couldn't answer that question because I don't think there's any data out there that shows that red S actually exists in Fiji. So yeah, that's when I realized that lack of knowledge, a lot of the athletes are just going with the flow and just ignoring all the symptoms.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Petra, you were going to come in here.
I found that especially so with the conversations that I had with the teenagers, sort of 13 to 16-year-olds, the focus groups, at the start for icebreaker purposes, just to get them used to using the language surrounding menstrual health. We just talk about, what they know, what they sort of, not so much about their personal experiences, because I was aware that not everyone might have a period, want to talk about the personal period, but more so, what do we know about this topic? And it struck me, I think it must have been the first or second focus group, where somebody asked me suddenly, oh, if I have this, is this not normal? And I realized how actually they obviously can only go off their own experiences, but there's like a real underlying concern that, oh, is this normal? Who can tell me whether it's normal? I can't really talk to anyone about this. And I suppose even some of those teenagers that said, oh, I went to the GP and had this conversation with them, and they just said, go on, take a hormonal contraceptive and see if you're better then. So it was quite interesting realizing actually how they see me, as in my role. Obviously I was there to do a research focus group and all that, but actually due to this lack of knowledge and this uncertainty and this lack of confidence, there was this real need to, please tell me, this is okay, well, it's not okay, what I should do if this isn't okay. So yeah, I don't know, it was a bit okay moment for me mid focus group.
That's so interesting that both of you had that experience of being seen as researcher and also maybe a health information provider. Agatha, we've got another question in the chat from Natalia Gallon Lopez, who's asking around barriers to collecting ethnicity data. So she says that one of the barriers to collecting ethnicity information from participants, particularly in international projects, is that there are no available frameworks or standardized categories, which makes sense as these concepts are socially, culturally constructed, and definitions vary significantly across regions. Obviously, we need to increase research that includes ethnic minorities, but how do you suggest we overcome initial uncertainty of ethnic and racial screening?
Okay, so I think from what I understand, or from my point of view, one of the most important things, because a lot of researchers would just go into these different cultural groups and then just conduct the research instead of understanding how I've been mentioning, like how I mentioned throughout my research, like practicing cultural safety. So that means like engaging with the elders in the community, understanding how the culture, the taboos or the different cultural traditions. I think that just understanding that and showing that you are interested more in that would encourage a lot of these like people from the different cultures to be engaged into your research, because a lot of my participants also were like hesitant in the first place when my name is Agatha, and it's not a Fijian name, so I had to create a video to show them that I'm from the Pacific. I was raised up on an island. I understand the different um, cultural beliefs and taboos across the Pacific, and so I had to do a video to encourage them, or to show that for them to be comfortable to be able to participate in my research. So that was one of the things I did. Like, I think it's best if you just talk to the elders in the community, learn more about the culture and the different traditions around menstruation, which is a very sensitive topic. And I know a lot of people who feel uncomfortable, but just showing that just practicing cultural safety would be really great whenever you're getting involved in different cultures. I hope that answered the question.
I found that a really useful answer, Agatha, so thanks very much. And a question from Morgan Ludington, for both panelists then. So she was wondering if preferences of period products came up and if marketing of social cultural influences the impact on the participants' choices. So I don't know, Petra, if you want to maybe answer that first and then we'll come to Agatha.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So preference of period products came up very individualized. So I'll distinguish here between adult participants and teenage participants. The adult participants that I've spoken to, again, anybody who could take part, it was 18 years and older, essentially. I've had participants that are from the age of 18 well into their 40s. Typically what they would report is a mix of preference of period products, but there is a trend towards almost starting out with pads, then exploring tampons. Some said they used tampons quite early because, for example, of a holiday or something like that, or because they struggle with heavy menstrual flow and therefore they use tampon and pad quite early on, as in as a teenager or a young adult. And then it's almost as if as menstruators have maybe more financial resources for more disposable income, things like period products or the menstrual cup, that's kind of conversation start to moving towards those more sustainable products. Amongst the teenagers, it's quite interesting that the schools in England have a budget that they can buy any type of menstrual product with. Okay, so that could include menstrual cups, period pads. I am aware of some schools that actually do buy those period pads, etc. Many schools only offer pads and don't offer tampons at all. The teenagers don't get taught how to use tampons or anything else. Many aren't even aware of how period pads would work. So to me, again, doing those focus groups with the teenagers, it was another sign of how that stigma within the school environment or between the kind of that even parent towards teenager interaction, how that is perpetuated and enacted. So there's clearly a fear of tampons. I would say, I think it's safe to say there's a worry, a fear of tampons, to some extent because it's inserted in the body. I think the kind of the narratives were such that indicated, oh, I'm not quite sure about this, but also a complete lack of knowledge. That they, even if they were to buy a packet of tampons and read about it, they're not quite sure how to do that, how to insert it, and nobody ever talks to them about it.
Yeah, and how about for yourself, Agatha? Did preference for period products or ideas attached to period products come through in your interviews?
So during my interviews, and even also in the survey, I had a question about period products. The most common one is pads. Tampons was looked at as no one really used tampons because a lot of them spoke about how their aunts or their moms or people older than them would say that tampons was viewed as like losing your virginity. So pads was the most common period product that was used across my participants.
That's really interesting. It seems like some sort of similarity is coming across from both different groups in different regions as well. So we do have time for maybe one or two more questions. So I don't know if anyone in our audience either wants to raise their hand and we can bring you in, or if you would like to type one quickly into the chat box.
Chloe, I noticed another question. I think somebody asked about how we define physical activity and exercise.
Perfect.
So just whilst we were talking, I actually went and I had a quick look at what we use as a definition, if that makes sense, which is a really, really valid point, actually. So in the paper, so this is the published paper, we say, hang on, there's a kind of a summarized version, you can read that yourself, but in the participant information sheet that we handed out to anyone, who may be interested in participation. So we said, in the question where it's asked, why have I been invited, and explains to the participant, because you regularly take part in sport and exercise. This means that you train in sport, gym, or gym-like environments two times or more per week. And then we give examples of typical activities. So we said typical activities could include some or all of the following: involvement in sports, just training and matches, weight training in the gym, for example, free weight and machine-based, cardiovascular training in the gym, walking, running on a treadmill, CrossFit and exercise classes such as strength, fitness, swimming, Pilates, yoga. I suppose what I would add is what I was trying to do here is, because the objective of the study, both studies really, was to talk to participants about how they navigated exercise spaces and social spaces of exercise. I was quite keen to communicate to potential participants. We're really interested in those that actually don't just go outside for a run. Those were also still very welcome to take part. But I did have some participants ask me about, I sometimes go on a group run. Does that count as well? I said, yeah, absolutely. As long as you have to not just consider yourself in your own home environment, exercising in front of a screen, that's great. So that's kind of a very vague, broad definition that we went with.
That's great. And I'm going to bring in just the last question today from Reem. And she asked, and I think this might be a really nice way to end this discussion too. So to both of you, did any of the participants speak about their experiences of menstruation in positive ways? So Agatha, will we come to you first with that final question?
Okay, so for me, one of the positive things that my participants shared was how whenever they had their first menstrual cycle, the celebration that came with it, they would have family feast, and some of the participants realized the families all gathered there to celebrate them entering womanhood. So that was one of the positive things that was shared to me by a couple of my participants.
That's amazing. And Petra, how about from your participants?
Yes, so it was almost as if some participants realized as they entered their 20s, 30s, that actually, even though it might not have been super positive, but they almost accepted it and embraced that their menstruation was part of who they were. I did have some participants say, oh yeah, that's what makes me a woman, and I'm really proud of that, but most had a more balanced, more accepting view of it. I suppose some participants also, especially those who had children, said, oh, actually, I realized, I had periods, I had babies and all that. So that was kind of the positive context in which they, mentioned it.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think thank you very much, Reem, for asking that question, because I think issues around taboo, stigma often come to the forefront because they are ways in which women and girls and all those that menstruate experience their periods. I think it is really important to highlight those positive experiences too, that give us that space to recognise that menstruation is complex and that meanings can vary across time, spaces, cultures, and all those meanings can be changed. So I'm really sorry to the last two questions in the chat box, but for time, I am going to need to wrap us up here. So I'd like to say thank you so much to Agatha and Petra for your fantastic presentations today. It's been really brilliant, and thank you to everybody that has joined us online. We will have the video recording put up on the CCSE YouTube site, so please do have a look there if you want to look back to that. But I think there is lots of positive futures coming for menstruation and sport research. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you all have a lovely day.